Welcome to The Hill. We hope you enjoy this week's message.
Okay guys, well, good afternoon. If you're a visitor here, you are very welcome. Now today what we're doing is I've just been for some time now, just been working my way through the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, the story that Mark writes down of Jesus on earth and Jesus coming to earth. And I'm going to kind of explain it like this. This is the kind of way that Mark works. It begins here, and as Mark goes along, it reaches a peak moment. And then as Mark finishes the account in the book of Mark, it reaches a low moment. In other words, the highest moment is the bit that I covered last time. There is a moment when Jesus says to these three guys who are following him, Peter, James, and John, he says, "Come up to the mountain with me. Come up to the mountain with me." And at the top of this mountain, they have an incredible encounter with Jesus Christ where he is just dazzling and he is effectively changed before them into this incredible, glowing man. And they realize that they are in the presence of someone special. And in many respects, that is what Peter has been doing the whole time. You see, Peter in chapter 1, verse 1, he says, this is the good news of Jesus Christ, God's Son. In other words, his intention all the way along was really to discover and reveal to anybody who will listen, because this is Peter's memories. And he's saying to this guy, John Mark, to write them down. He's saying, Peter says to John Mark, write this stuff down. And he says, and begin like this. This is the good news of Jesus Christ, God's Son. That's where he begins. And then if you're familiar with this book, and if you're not, I'll just explain it. There's a moment when they are on the sea and they are under threat, and the disciples and Jesus are there, and they suddenly see Jesus who is asleep. They wake him up and say, "Don't you care, Jesus, that we're going to drown because there is a storm on that sea and they are in danger." And these are not lightweights. These are seasoned fishermen. And Jesus calms the storm. And it says, and I think it's chapter 4, verse 41. They see what happens and they say, "Who is this man? Who is this man?" And Peter's purpose all the way through, therefore, is to reveal, as he gets to this point, the identity of who Jesus is. Who Jesus is. Who is this man? One other quick recap I want to also bring is this, is that as they're going up the mountain, and you maybe recall this last time, but if you go to on the website and go to the previous talk on Mark's Gospel, the message, you'll hear about this. Just before Jesus says to Peter, James, and John, "Why don't you come up the mountain with me?" Peter makes an almighty muck up. In fact, what happens here is this. Jesus says to them, what's going to happen at this point is that I'm going to go to Jerusalem and they're going to kill me. They're going to kill me. And Peter says, "Not on my watch. That ain't going to happen." And Jesus turns to Peter and he says, he basically says, "Get behind me, Satan. You have in mind the things of man, not the things of God." I can't think there can be many lower points in being a follower of Jesus than have Jesus say to you, "Get behind me, Satan." That's a bad performance review, isn't it? Yeah? Okay, so Peter's at his lowest point. But Jesus says to him, "Come up the mountain with James and John and see me at my highest." And the point I made last time was this. Just because we might be in our lowest place doesn't mean we can't see Jesus at his best. And so all the way through this book, Peter is saying to John Mark, get this down. Understand who this man is. Understand the point of this man coming. But also there are takeaways for us, messages, things for us we can learn. For example, in chapter 8, verse 35. Let me just read this. It says here. Let me just read chapter 9 as an example. He sat down, called the 12 over to him and said, "Whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone." Throughout this book, there are messages and stuff that we can take away and apply into our own lives, not just to understand who it is we serve, who it is we believe in, the way and the character of God, that even if you're at the lowest place in your life, you can still see God at his best and he invites you up the mountain. Do you remember I said Peter wasn't tagging on, sneaking up the mountain. He was invited up the mountain. But there's messages and that and benefit, therefore, for us. So now I want to come to the next bit, really, which is the bit as they come down from the mountain. You see, they come down from the mountain, and what happens is, as these three men and Jesus come down from the mountain, they encounter a noisy crowd. They encounter a crowd, and there's noise and there's arguing going on. And I'm just going to read you that tiny little bit as they come down from the mountain in chapter 9, verse 14, okay? Just to 16, when Jesus says this. When they returned to the other disciples, so they've come down from the mountain of seeing this incredible revelation of Jesus, they see a large crowd surrounding them, the disciples, and some teachers of religious law were arguing with them. When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe, and they ran to greet him. What is all this arguing about? Jesus asked. It's a fascinating thing. He comes down from the mountain, and there's something different about him. They're amazed. They're in awe. It's like whatever took place on that mountain, whatever transformation took place on that mountain. And it says earlier in the chapter that when they were on top of the mountain, Jesus' appearance was transformed. His clothes became dazzling white, far whiter than any earthly bleach could ever make them. It would appear that whatever happened on top of that mountain, Jesus brought something of it back down the bottom, which is what caused them to be amazed, what caused them to be somewhat in awe of him, and they ran to greet him. And then it goes on then, what were they arguing about? And I'll read you this story now, and we're going to unpack it. So from verse 17. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, "Teacher, I brought my son so you could heal him. He is possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk. And whenever this spirit seizes him, it throws him violently to the ground. Then he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't do it." Jesus said to them, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought the boy. But when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into a violent convulsion, and he fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. "How long has this been happening?" Jesus asked the boy's father. He replied, "Since he was a little boy. The spirit often throws him into the fire or into water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can." "What do you mean, if I can?" Jesus asked. Anything is possible if a person believes." And the father instantly cried out, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the crowd of onlookers was growing, he rebuked the evil spirit. "Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak," he said, "I command you to come out of this child and never enter him again." Then the spirit screamed and threw the boy into another violent convulsion and left him, and the boy appeared to be dead. A murmur ran through the crowd as people said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and helped him to his feet, and he stood up. Afterwards, when Jesus was alone in the house with his disciples, they asked him, "Why couldn't we cast out that evil spirit?" And Jesus replied, "This kind can be cast out only by prayer." Leaving that region, they traveled through Galilee. Jesus didn't want anyone to know he was there, for he wanted to spend some time with his disciples and teach them. He said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed, but 3 days later he will rise from the dead." They didn't understand what he was saying, however, and they were afraid to ask him what he meant. He says here, it's going to end here. He comes back down off the mountain and he reminds them again, it's going to end here. But in the middle of this is this story. And it's important, before we move on with this story and draw something out of it, it's important that we do this. It's important that we cover what we do know about this story and what we don't know. So there are some things we don't know, and if we don't know them, let us not draw conclusions or practices or ideas from them that, quite frankly, are unhelpful and damaging to the gospel. So, for example, we don't know this boy's condition. We know the symptoms, but we don't know the cause. And in fact, we don't actually know his age. You see, we might think, well, this is a young boy, but actually when Jesus says, how long has this been happening? He says from childhood, which suggests actually the boy is beyond childhood. So he could be a young man. We don't know what the disciples said or what they tried to do, but whatever they said and whatever they tried to do, clearly it was unsuccessful. It might look like symptoms that we're familiar with, but quite frankly, we have no idea what the condition was and what the cause was. We can't deny that this passage, in this particular passage, indicates that there is a spiritual dynamic to what is ever going on with this boy. But it is important for us to understand that the Bible doesn't teach that all sickness has a spiritual dynamic in that way. In fact, the only thing I would suggest that we can draw from this particular conclusion is that this boy's problem was a spiritual issue. That's it. In fact, we know as we go earlier in the book of Mark, and Jesus has done other healings, it is clear. And I'll just give you a couple of references if you're making notes, but if you don't, it's fine. You can listen back later. Chapter 1, verse 40, Jesus just heals someone. There's no mention of any spiritual condition. There's no casting out. There's none of that stuff. He just heals someone. And very famously, he heals a man who's paralyzed. And he says, up on your feet. Up on your feet. And that's in chapter 2, verse 3. And there are other examples. And so it's important that we understand that. It's important we cover that. And that's why I like teaching. And that's why I've taken so long to go through the book of Mark. Because when you do that, you're forced to tackle these kind of passages. You're forced to address the stuff that is poorly addressed by Christians often in the world. You don't need to do much of a Google search to realize there are many examples where people have made a conclusion that such and such and such and such and such and that is a spiritual condition. And then they've done terrible things as a consequence of that and caused much damage. Much damage, not only in the name of Christ. Let's just park Jesus' name for a second. They've done much damage to the person who has been suffering. Sometimes they've done cruel things. And they've taken a simplistic approach which doesn't handle the full teaching of Scripture. When in fact, if you engage with the Bible and if you engage with real people, you will realize, and we will realize, that people's conditions and people's challenges and people's circumstances are hugely complex. But the one overriding thing that we need to take away from all of Jesus' encounters is he's full of compassion. And we aspire and desire to not only have the compassion of Christ, but the wisdom of Christ as well. So what do we know then? I think we might conclude, we don't know for sure, it might be this man's only son. We know, as I've already said, that the condition in verse 21 was long-standing, since childhood, he said. I would suggest to you that the problem lay, or the solution, lay with Jesus, not with the man's faith. You see, the real difference, the real clincher here was this. The man went to the disciples and the disciples couldn't do anything. Nothing changed about the man's faith. The man then goes to Jesus and Jesus does something. Nothing's changed about the man's faith. The problem, or the solution, lay with Jesus. And the problem or the obstacle to this particular healing and this particular set of circumstances lay with the disciples, not the man. Many people have sought healing. Many people have sought breakthrough. Many people have sought circumstances changing their lives. And you know what? There are wise things that we can do, clearly, to change our lives. But quite often, actually, when they've come to the church, the problem has actually been in the church's response to them, not with them. I can still remember now, it was probably near midnight. Jake is probably 2 years old. He doesn't know I'm telling this story. He's looking at me panicking now. Don't worry, Jake, you're 2, mate. You couldn't have done much wrong then. Well, actually, no. He's about 2 years old, suffering with asthma, and his breathing is in a really bad condition. Hannah's in the back of the car. We've not strapped him in. She is cradling him, and I am driving to the hospital. And she says, will you speed up? I can't fix it. I can't change it. I'm relying on the hospital to help me. I can pray and I pray and I pray, but it doesn't seem to solve the situation. I've shared before, Hannah's lost her hearing, and that time when we thought she might have a brain tumour. I can't fix it. I can't solve it. I can't bring a resolution to it. I can pray, but nothing happens. You will have your own stories when you have been in despairing situations and you have effectively tried to seek the help of Christ and thought, why does nothing change? Why does nothing change? And we can't deny. One, I think the Bible makes it clear that not everybody who suffers is made well instantly or certainly in this life. But we certainly can't deny that in our own lives. The solution, though, in this story lay with Jesus, and the problem or obstacle to it lay with the disciples and not the father of the son. So why this story? Why? Why bother? What's particularly important about this story? Do you remember? I was saying it's Peter's memories. Why, John Mark, get this one down. He could have chosen any of them. In fact, at the end of his friend John's account of Jesus' life, John says this: the disciples saw Jesus do many other miraculous signs in addition to the one recorded in this book. That's John's book. But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him you will have life by the power of his name. Jesus is teaching us something. And I think some reason why this story is in there comes back to what I said in the last few verses I read in this chapter or this particular text today, where he says the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. He will be killed. He will be killed. He will rise again, but he will be killed. So what is he trying to teach us, Mark? What's Mark's ultimate purpose? This is the gospel of Jesus Christ, God's own Son. It's the tale of two fathers. If you recall up the top of the mountain, they're up there with Jesus. Jesus is transformed. And out of the clouds, a voice says, well, let me read it. This is my dearly loved Son. Listen to him. This is my dearly loved Son. Listen to him. So at the top of the mountain, you have a father and a son. And then you come down to the bottom of the mountain, and you now have a father and a son. And yet this father's in a different situation. You see, the father at the top of the mountain, the Father of God, is saying, this is my son, and I am surrendering him and giving him up to a terrible, terrible fate. In fact, we must come to understand this. When did Jesus begin to suffer? It wasn't at the moment of his arrest. It was the moment, I would suggest, as he came of age and he began to understand the scriptures, which, as the Bible indicates, was very young. And he understood, and his mother Mary said to him, you know, this is your... And she says in Luke 2:52, he grew in stature and wisdom and knowledge and understanding. When he was 12, he was found in the temple teaching the religious teachers. Jesus had suffered since childhood because he knew where he was going and he knew what he was going to end up. He knew. If you knew that was going to happen to you at a young age, and you knew it was coming, you'd never forget it. It would be on your mind every day. And so we have two sons, both suffering since childhood. Two fathers, both who love their sons dearly. One is grappling for his son's well-being and grappling with his son's sickness. And another father is giving his only son for the sins of the world. May I say it like this? One father is at his lowest point. He encounters Jesus, and he's now at his highest point. His son is made well. His son, who has suffered since childhood, is made well. Incredible. Another father who is at his highest point, in perfect relationship with his son, sends his son who encounters the world and is killed. Two contrasts are going on. Two contrasts are going on. This is the one that, do you remember James and John were on the mountain with Peter? And John, in the beginning of his book about Jesus' life, says, we have seen him. The Word became flesh. He was made human among us. He became flesh. We have seen him full of grace and truth. He is the only Son of the Father, Jesus Christ. So what's the takeaway for us then? Well, I want to go to verse 17, and we want to take something away that we can go, well, okay, what is this? I mean, this is incredible. And this is the whole point of Mark's Gospel. Mark's Gospel is the point, it's the good news of Jesus Christ. But there is stuff for us to take away. And I want to draw out a couple of things. I'm staggered by the award on Friday night. Hannah said, David Wilkinson in her talk on the cloud, which is on the website, said this: if you meet a human need, the world will be a path to your door. Oh, let the world come to us. Let the world come to us. But what will we offer them when they come? And here you go in verse 17. One of the men stood up and said, Jesus, what are you all arguing about? And he said, Teacher, I brought my son so you could heal him. And he says this: so I asked your disciples to do the job, but they couldn't do it. In other words, what can we learn from this? The man came to the disciples because they saw in the disciples something of Jesus. They came to Jesus, but they looked to the disciples. And the more we are in his company, the more that will happen for us. People are looking for Jesus. And we want to be a church where when they look, they say, I'm going to go there because it seems to me that these people have been with Jesus. But it's sobering, isn't it? They were unable to sort it out. They seem to have, I don't know whether they overpromised, but one thing's for sure, they under-delivered, didn't they? You know what I mean? And if we're honest, when we're with people who've got terrible situations, heartache, brokenness, I feel like that. I can feel like that. I feel like I've got all the promises, but I'm unable to deliver. And that's the truth, isn't it? That's our encounter and our experience sometimes. So what is it we can take away from this then? I would suggest it is this. If we want the compassion, the wisdom, and the power of Jesus Christ, we must seek to remain in the presence of Christ. You see, the difference between the disciples at the bottom and the disciples at the top was Jesus Christ and his presence. The closer we are to the damage and destruction from evil, the more we need to have been with Christ on the mountain. It's just true. Remember, We're invited there even when we're at our lowest. It's not about us. It's not about our performance. Peter, you've just done the worst performance review. You've had the worst performance review ever. I mean, it can't get any worse, can it? Get behind me, Satan. I mean, forgive me, but to me, that's a pretty low point in the Christian life. Come up the mountain and see me at my best. So whatever you do, don't let your performance stop you being on the mountain. But let us remember this, that we cannot meet the needs of the world in any degree of real measure, of real value, of real wisdom, with real power, with real compassion, unless we're with Christ on the mountain as well ourselves. That we might go down with him, with the sense of him being with us. In verse 28, they say to Jesus, why couldn't we do it? Why couldn't we cast out the evil spirit? And there are 4 things the Bible teaches that would make a difference. Authority, gifting, faith, and one more, and I'll come to that in a minute. Authority. Jesus says, all authority I give to you. That's true. That's what the Bible says. All authority I leave with you. The disciple, all of us have got that authority in Christ. But in all honesty, if I may use an example of someone who's given authority, it's a police officer who's given authority. From the day they join, they're sworn in, they're given all the authority. They've got all the power. It's all there. There's no more. It doesn't get added later. It's there. But the truth is they have to grow in that authority. They have to become experienced in that authority. So there's a sense of where, as a Christian, you could argue, well, one thing that would make a difference, that would give us the power and the compassion and the wisdom of Christ and make us more effective and more effective in what we do and be more like Christ and everything else, would be to grow in authority. Well, we need to grow, therefore, in obedience and experience. That's what we need to do. That's how we grow in authority. Gifting. In this room is incredible gifting. Incredible gifting. I really don't care whether you think it's natural gifting or some sort of spiritual gifting. My point is, in this room is incredible talent. Incredible talent. Incredible gifting. And I think God does both. And the Bible says about gifting is you need to fan it into flames. In other words, if you fan something into flames, you need to make it a safe fire, don't you? That doesn't damage you and doesn't damage others. But you need to use your gifting. My encouragement to you today is this. If you've been given gifting, are you fanning it into flames? Are you fanning it into flames? For the good of others. And then faith. Well, faith is about trust. In fact, somebody said once, faith is like spelt risk, R-I-S-K. In other words, faith is courage in the face of fear, courage in the face of maybe a sense of, oh gosh, but what if it goes wrong? What if this doesn't go right? There's a sense of faith. How do you grow in faith? You step out in trust, not in yourself, but in God and the character and nature of God. So all these things are important. And if we can grow in these things, then we will be closer to what I talked about, the compassion, the wisdom, and the power of Christ. And you see this throughout the Bible. We see this throughout the Bible. But the one I want to focus on, the one that Jesus responds to here, which I would suggest might be the one that is most important of all, is this. He says, prayer. Which I think could be written time. Time with God. Set aside time. I believe we've just done the starting point course. They're just finishing it up. And I think on the day away, somebody was telling me, Grant was just referencing somebody and said, I never pray for more than 20 minutes at a time, but I never go more than 20 minutes without praying. So when I say time, I don't mean a time in the morning and a time in the evening. I just mean time. It might be the time where you're walking to the bus stop. It might be the time that you're queuing at the shops. It might be early morning. It might be when you're sitting just having a drink, when you're just pausing for a moment. But time with God. I've spoken about these things already, and I'll reference them now. Just in Talk 26 on the 3rd of June, I spoke about healing. I spoke about demonic and spiritual forces. But right back on the 23rd of April, 2017, I spoke about prayer and finding those times on the mountain the way that Jesus did. And my encouragement to us is this, that we should do that. It's important to us. It's important to us. The Bible uses two characteristics. I'm just going to finish with this. Two characteristics to describe his church. There's several others, but these particular two are in Matthew 5. He says you're like a city on a hill that can't be hidden. In other words, we're like a city up there, reflecting the light of the world, reflecting the light of Christ. That's number one. The second one he uses is salt. He says, you are the salt of the earth. In fact, I'm going to bring up an image now of salt, just in case you're not aware of what salt is. That is salt. Isn't that good? Thank you. Helpful. But I now want us to take a closer look at, because we are all salt. But I now want to take a closer look at one of those granules. Look at it. Rough edges. It's not smooth. It's not perfect. It's rough and, quite frankly, unique. Ugly? Don't know. Amazing, but equally it's rough edges, isn't it? It's probably more effective with others than it is on its own, but it's okay on its own. The wise book of Ecclesiastes says this, two are better than one. It's better to be with others and do this life of following Christ. It's better to minister and serve God together than it is on your own. If you think you're a lone Christian doing the thing on your own, I suggest you'll be less effective than if you work with others. If you join with others, first of all, you get the authority and the gifting and the faith of others in the room with you. It's much better. So it's rough edges, it's with others. I was thinking about this on Friday. I was talking with somebody on Friday morning. I said, you know what? And this is particularly important for us about Matthew's House. Matthew's House isn't a Christian project. It's just got Christians in the project. Salt in the project. Projects can't be Christians. It's theologically not possible. The project shall believe in Jesus Christ. No, it won't. What is vital is that the Christians are in the world and don't lose their saltiness. And then the wise book of Ecclesiastes says this, not only do two have a good return and two can defend themselves, but it says even better than that, a cord of 3 strands cannot easily be broken. In other words, the real thing, and if we bring up that salt granule again, the really important thing here is not its shape, not what it looks like, not its performance. What's its real thing? Its essence. Is it salt? Is it salt? Does it have the chemical essence and composition of being salt? Don't lose our saltiness. And we're back to Peter's friend John. And I'll finish with this. Jesus speaking. I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. He goes on to say this in verse 4 of chapter 15. Remain in me and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine. And you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine and you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. Much fruit. Guys, we need to spend time on the mountain. Every one of us will be different. Every one of us has got a different thing. I don't mean spend time reading. I mean just spend time praying and then reading sometimes, but praying and saying, God, you're here. You dwell in me. You're in me. I'm the salt of the world. I'm the light of the world because Christ dwells within me. Enjoy those moments with Jesus Christ. Stop trying to work out, was it spiritual enough? Or did it feel right? Recognize that he is there with you and be on the mountain with him. And we will grow in the wisdom and the compassion and the presence and the power of Jesus Christ. And so I encourage us to be there, but also for us to be here in the valley among the mud and the mayhem and the mess, where people will come to us and they'll beat a path to our door and they say, why do you have what you have? How can you help me? And we say, give me wisdom, Lord. Give me power, Lord. Give me peace, Lord. Give me something for this person that I may give them a piece of you, that they may come and know Jesus Christ, the good news of God.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the Hill Church, please visit our website, the-hill.co, or come and see us on Sunday at 4 p.m. in Matthew's house.